Hello, and welcome to Senior Spot. Today, I have a guest with me that is also a friend and has helped me with some life planning. Her name is Angelique Eliopoulos, and she's with Eliopoulos and Eliopoulos, a firm right in Chelmsford. So I'm delighted to have her here to share some of her knowledge in making sure that we plan the very best for our future. So welcome, Angelique.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted because I know that you've certainly set my mind at ease and my husband's mind at ease in making sure that we have things set up should decisions need to be made for us. And I know that our senior community would benefit from hearing from it, but also to share with their own children.
Sure.
And we'll also talk in the future a little bit about, just how there's not really an age limit to it.
Right.
But first, I would love to just hear about your background, and your firm is in Chelmsford, and you grew up in Chelmsford. So tell us a little bit about your history.
Sure. Lifelong Chelmsford resident. I left a little bit, of course, to go to school and worked a little bit, but have now moved back to Chelmsford, and that's where my business is as well. So I love the community and the surrounding towns. My husband's from Westford, so we really wanted to not only set up our lives here, but set up our business here as well. I can't take all the credit though. My brother is my law partner, so Philip Eliopoulos. He started the firm, and he's 11 years older than me, so I was always working with him through high school, through college, through law school. So it was a very easy transition. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and that was to sort of just join him and ultimately become partners, which we are now. So and he also lives in Chelmsford. So we're just again, we love the community, we love the people. We've gotten to know people, of course, over the years, and it's important for us to sort of be involved and be helpful any way we can. And
Sure.
This is important for me, and I'm so grateful to have asked to be on, because it is so important to just get that information out there, because something that's so, I guess, ingrained in me, and this is something I talk about every day with my clients that come in, and I still get surprised as people come in, later and later in life and have not done any planning. And I mean simple planning. I think one of the misconceptions, we can talk about it, is that, I only need an estate plan if I have, $1 million. Or
Right.
I only need an estate plan if I have kids, or if I don't have kids, or, whatever it is. And really, everyone over the age of 18 needs at least some simple estate planning, and
Okay,
obviously
so-
get more complex
So
as they
18,
get.
I mean, that's not an age that you would typically think
yeah.
of someone needing to plan. So
Yeah.
can you share a little bit why it would be important for
Yeah.
even an 18-year-old
Sure.
to be able to plan?
So I know you have 2 kids.
I sure do.
And when they turn 18 and they go off to college, you'll have no rights to receive any medical information about them if something should happen to them while they're away.
I've
Or
heard
even if they're
that.
not, even if they're home with you.
And I was wondering if it was true. So, okay, so that's affirmed. That
Yeah.
is true.
So, we call them adult children, because I know, I'm 30, almost 6, and I still call my mother 5 times a day. So I'm an adult child, her adult child forever. But, anyone over the age of 18, a parent loses the right to receive any information about them. So I can give you an example. We had a client whose child was admitted into a hospital over the age of 18, but still very young. I think he was 20, for mental health reasons. And because he was not in a position to, agree that his mother could be contacted, he was moved from that hospital, and it took us 3 days to find out where he was.
Wow. That's pretty scary for
Right.
the family.
Absolutely.
And I would
it was
imagine for the
terrifying.
son, too.
Of course. And it was only by, we had to call around in different places, but by law and, by the HIPAA laws, the medical providers are not allowed to give out that information. And when you turn 18, your parents no longer even have that right to receive information. So it's really important, of course it doesn't have to be your parents, but it should be someone that you love and trust. And maybe I should just backtrack a little bit. A healthcare proxy is a document that you put into place where you designate a person to make healthcare decisions for you if you become unable to do so.
Okay.
And also just receive information about care, so that person would be able to admit you or discharge you into facilities, contract for health insurance on your behalf, really just receive information from you, from your providers about you, so that they can make, decisions for you.
Sure. So that's so interesting to hear that even at such a young age, it's important to be able to have those plans in place, because you don't know what's going to happen.
Sure.
It's the unexpected that you run into some of these difficult situations and challenges. And I would think that, you mentioned another point where you said that people think that they need to have millions of dollars in order to set up plans and have things put in. And there's all these words out there, trusts and proxy and durable power of attorney. There's all these different things. So what I would love to do is to hear from you.
Yeah.
What do those things mean?
Sure.
And why do you need them at any age above 18?
Sure. So this is a good topic to talk about. And for your listeners, this is sort of how a meeting would go in my office.
Okay,
If someone
so
calls
let's
me and
pretend.
says, I need an estate plan, I don't have anything, I don't know what I need, can you help me?
Okay.
And so we'll sit down and basically have sort of a longer, version of this conversation, which is to say, there are documents that everybody should have as part of their estate plan. And I like to split them in two categories. One category are documents that are going to protect you while you're still alive.
Okay.
Right? So often people are coming in to me and saying, I want to protect my assets, or I need to have a will. And of course, those are important for your heirs, right? But you come in, you're my client. I need to make sure that you're going to be protected during your
Okay,
lifetime.
and I did this with
Right.
you. My husband and I did this.
Yeah, so you know
so
this
we
was
can pretend. So I sat there, and I do know your process, and I know that you certainly walked us through a number of things, and we would consider ourselves, educated, fairly well-informed people, and we certainly walked away with a very different understanding of it. So I'm sitting here, I'm your client, and what are the things that I need to know and prepare for when I'm still alive?
Sure. So I would say three basics, or two and sort of a bonus. One is a power of attorney. A power of attorney is where I designate someone to basically sign for me. So if I need to sign my name to a business document, to a check, to a deed, to a purchase and sale agreement, anything at all.
Which a lot of times those are the big things that you run into jams.
Right, absolutely. So I'm appointing that person now so that if something happens to me, I'm still alive, but I'm incapacitated, I'm just unable to do that. That person is going to be authorized to sign for me. Often husband and wives think that they can just sign for each other. So if they own real estate together and both of them are on a deed, let's say something happens to one spouse and they want to refinance the house to get, pull out some equity to be able to pay for the care of the other. You can't just sign for the other person. You need to have a power of attorney in place.
Interesting.
So for younger people, we'll draft the document so that, you're creating the document now, but it doesn't come into effect until you become incapacitated. So you're not necessarily giving someone the right today to be able to sign for you. That right only kicks in if you're unable to do it yourself.
Okay. Now, in going with that, is it something, sometimes through the course of life, you may make a decision 5 years later, and you may decide to change.
Yeah, and you should. You should always be looking at these documents to make sure that the choices you make still make sense. So people will often say to me, well, when do I have to come back to you to look at it? And the answer is, I'll look at it anytime you want me to. You should be looking at it, take a quick peek at it every year. The person you appointed as your guardian of your children, as your healthcare proxy, as your power of attorney, does that person still live in the area? Are they sick? Have they gotten married to someone that you don't care for? Have
Right.
they?
Those things happen.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, and so long as you're okay, you don't need to come in and see me. I'm happy to see you, and
Okay.
we'll always meet. But you should be looking at all of those things, right? Just to make sure that the choices
So it's
you
not
make.
set in stone.
Absolutely not. All revocable.
So that's power of attorney.
Power of attorney.
Okay.
Healthcare proxy we talked about a few minutes ago, but it's similar to the power of attorney, but for medical decisions. So again, I appoint someone and an alternate. I didn't mention that before, but it's always important to name two people.
In the event that something might prohibit the initial person
Right.
to be able to take
you're
on that responsibility.
Right. So
Okay.
I appoint my spouse, but he and I are together, the most, and if something happens to the two of us, I need a backup
Absolutely.
already in place. So again, that healthcare proxy is going to be able to make healthcare decisions for me if I'm unable to verbalize those decisions for myself.
Okay.
And so here's the problem. When you don't have those documents, there's of course a court, the alternative system is that you have to go to court, or someone has to go to court to be appointed as either your guardian or your conservator. So I'm sure people have heard those terms floating around. That process is expensive, time-consuming, confusing because it involves probate court and just, forms. And again, it's really just when you need this document, it's typically in some sort of crisis or close to crisis. And something that you can do in my office in a day for, relatively inexpensively is going to cost you thousands of dollars and 3 months of time when you have to go to court.
So that means that being proactive and having those things in place then would negate a lot of emotional, financial, time-consuming tasks.
Absolutely. And and I can give you, I know I always have examples,
I love
unfortunately,
examples.
of sort of the
I love
what
examples,
happens when you don't.
and I love stories. So tell us,
Yeah.
a story about when you don't do that.
Yeah,
What's happened?
So we had a client come in. She thought she was all set. She had had a healthcare proxy. Her husband was ill, ended up in the hospital, and was clear that he was not going to be able to return home. When she got to the hospital and showed them the healthcare proxy, which I don't know the circumstances of where, if she had done it. Sometimes people will download forms off the internet or
Okay.
sort of do it on their own.
So it wasn't official. It was just
Right.
paperwork. Okay.
And it was, these documents have certain requirements. They, whether it's, they've different documents have different requirements, but notarized,
Sure.
witnesses, things like that. And this document was witnessed by, it was basically witnessed by each other and one of their children.
Which
and
wouldn't be
that's
enough.
not enough,
Okay.
right? It has to be an independent witness. And so the hospital wouldn't take it. So here she is, and there were obviously many more details, but in sort of a crisis situation where she needs to get her husband from point A to point B, and we had to file a guardianship with the court for her to be able to have that power that unfortunately she thought she had taken care
Okay.
of.
All right. So speaking with somebody, because there is so much information you can get online from friends and so on and so forth. So speaking with an attorney, I know, for my husband and I, when we set plans in place, and we did it just prior to us both leaving on a trip, which I think is,
That's common.
it was a business trip,
Yeah.
and we were both going to be leaving for it. So something that kind of propelled us to make that decision in case, we both, weren't able to make any decisions. But in this case, she thought she was covered,
Right.
but she wasn't. So
Right.
you really do need to make the decisions first and then see someone who can properly
Yeah.
designate that for you.
And, if you've done that before, at least have someone check them. I mean, certainly, our office, and I'm sure many offices in the area, will look at your estate planning,
Right.
and as just a consultation and say,
Sure.
you're okay. You
Yeah.
don't need to do
And
anything.
so for some of our viewers, you may have all this in place. You may think you have this all in place, but it'd be a good tip for everyone to just double check and make sure
Yeah,
that it's
absolutely.
official.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that's a terrible story. I can't wait to hear some good stories.
I know. Unfortunately, the terrible stories are the best sort of learning stories.
Okay.
Because the other story that I could tell you is sort of boring, even though it's a wonderful
But
story.
let's hear it because it
It's sort
sounds
of
like
the-
it's doing it right.
Yeah, the boring story is that, I had a client, let's say 10 years ago, husband and wife passes away without a will. So we probate her estate, which is, for a number of reasons, much more complicated and wouldn't necessarily follow her wishes had she done a will.
Okay.
There was, a sibling that maybe she may or may not have left assets to, or, things like that, that you can specify if you do your own will. So anyway, at that time, we made sure we did proper estate planning for Dad, right? And fast forward, 10 years later, Dad just passed away recently. Family came in to do, have a meeting with me about the next steps in terms of probating the estate, and basically everything was taken care of. We had transferred everything into a will. There's one small asset that needs to be probated, but because we did all that paperwork, it's going to be an expedited process, not even sort of your typical probate.
So this is a family that learned from initially, an experience that didn't go smoothly, and with your help and putting things in order, they didn't have to experience it again.
Right, and so they came in, and it was really, they had so much going on in their own lives. This was not a thing that they needed to be worried about, and they weren't worried, and everything was taken care of. And that's, at the end of the day, why I love this part of my business so much. It's not, you're going to court and you're waiting for an answer in this, litigation, or you don't know how. This is something, you come in and you have a problem, and I can really take care of that problem for you so that you can, rest easy and know that when you pass away, your heirs are going to have an easier time. And things come up, of course, all the time, but we draft the documents with enough leeway in there that we can take care of those problems and address them,
Sure.
when we get there.
So those are related to, being able to sign and to work on someone's behalf, and then also make medical choices on someone's behalf. How about the different terms like trusts and estates? And
Yep.
because you mentioned right at the beginning, which I think you hit the nail on the head, that people associate that with when you have a lot to
Right.
leave.
Yeah.
I personally am a big believer in, when you leave your legacy, it's not about what you leave, it's about the
course.
memories and everything. So tell us about,
Yeah.
no matter what you have, why it's important to do
Sure.
that.
So I would say, first of all, the word trust, there are so many different kinds of trusts. So another thing, often people come in and say, I need a trust. and then we have to sort of back up. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a different kind of trust than they might think.
Okay.
So, just so I don't sort of bore you with the details of, the 20 kinds of trusts I can draft you, suffice it to say, it could be, I have a trust for my daughter. I have a 1-year-old daughter, and I have a husband. And, because we have a 1-year-old daughter, we certainly don't have $1 million, right? But I have a trust in place so that if something happens to my husband and I, and she's still a child, and child by my definition, when I make a trust, I can define what I mean by that. So the law
Okay.
says 18, but in my trust, and it doesn't matter, you could pick 25, 27, 29.
Okay.
So basically, if something happened to my husband and I, and she was still a child, our assets, whether it be life insurance, that we've named the trust as beneficiary, or our home, that we've named the trust as beneficiary, and basically we have a will that sort of mirrors our intentions that says, first everything's going to pass to each other, and then everything will come into our family trust.
Okay.
Now it doesn't matter that if that trust even holds $10,000. I mean, it doesn't matter what that amount is. But the reality is that child cannot inherit money in Massachusetts, and even if they could, I don't want her to. So
Interesting.
my brother, right, as an example, is the trustee of my trust. So if something happens to us, my daughter will get everything she needs, but she has to get the money through my brother, who's going to make sure that the money's productive, that it's not going to be attachable by any of her creditors, so that she can't, go out and buy a Ferrari and use the trust as collateral, so that the money is protected and she'll have access to it for all of her needs, for schooling, for medical, for her, any need she has.
And it doesn't mean necessarily that, let's say your brother, who is the trustee of, and managing her funds.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they can't be touched until a certain age that you designate. It
Right.
just means that someone else is helping to
Right, the
manage
contrary,
it.
exactly.
Okay.
So she can get access to money her entire life after we're gone. It's just that she gets it through him, so that it's protected.
Okay.
And then when she turns whatever age we've designated in the trust, whatever money's left over, she'll get outright.
Okay.
But you're not having an 18-year-old inherit a house,
Right.
or an asset that they don't know how to manage.
Sure. Sure.
So-
I mean, most adults have a hard time managing
Yeah,
those
right.
things.
No,
so
right,
I think
right.
it's,
Yeah.
it would be a lot to ask
Yeah.
a child to. And it's interesting that you state that it's in Massachusetts. Do other states? I mean, we're so close to New Hampshire.
Yeah. No, I mean, so what will happen is if you did no planning, I mean, essentially the court will institute a trust.
Okay.
Right? The court's not going to write a check to have the estate write a check to a 12-year-old. So
But it saves a lot of maybe the arguing of those that are left behind.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking of different stories that I know that, in my family and other families that I know, that if you don't designate a person, sometimes it's very challenging.
Oh, yeah.
And people will kind of hold the purse strings and the power. And so it seems to me like it would be a lot more beneficial to name that person
Sure.
prior to having it be named for.
Absolutely, and same goes with guardians, right? So a will, in your will, if you have minor children, that's where you're going to point who the guardians are going to be. And I know it's very hard, and that's often something that prevents people from coming in because they just can't decide.
But that's another, like the power of attorney,
Yeah.
and probably the healthcare proxy that is not set in stone.
Of course, no, you can change your mind 100 times. But at the end of the day, it's whoever you're going to choose is going to be better than who the court's going to, anyone would just come forward, and the court would basically approve it or not approve it, depending on, like you said, what the dynamics of the family, if somebody's contesting it or, something.
Right, and that just makes it difficult for
Yeah.
for everybody. So any other things I would really like to know what not to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
You told us great things about what to do.
Yes, great. And what not to do is great.
So what not to do?
So I'll sort of take the conversation we just had about, someone who's maybe just starting a family and having a trust to protect money for their children. On
And
the
maybe
other,
even from the perspective of a senior who
Right, so-
maybe hasn't done this
Yeah,
yet.
no,
And
exactly.
it's never too late. That's
Never.
the other thing too that I really want to encourage is that it's never too late to do this. So
Right.
sometimes people might be in their 70s or
Oh,
80s
yeah,
and think,
and that's a
you know
great-
what, I'm just going to let everybody else handle it. Well, that might actually cause more problems and more issues for the family that you might be leaving behind. So for our seniors, what are the most important things for them not to do?
Sure. So when seniors come to me, the most often the first question is, I would like to protect some of my assets in case I need to apply for Medicaid.
Okay.
Now that's something we could talk about for an hour in my office, so I'll try to sort of, narrow it down or sort of in a nutshell. But and so there's good ways to do that, and then there's easier things to do that I would say are the things not to do.
Okay.
So
Well, a lot of times the easy way to do things isn't always the
right,
best
and
solution.
unfortunately that is the case with a lot of estate Medicaid planning. So quickly, in order for Medicaid to not count an asset that you have when you're applying, so if you need to apply to Medicaid for long-term care services, you can only have $2,000 of countable assets. Now, if you've done planning, one example of planning is that you can transfer assets into a particular kind of trust. This kind of trust is irrevocable, so it's different than the other all the other documents we were talking about.
Okay,
right.
Irrevocable.
Revocable is, can I change my mind? Can I do this? Can I do
Okay,
that?
so this one you
irrevocable
can't change.
is right. There are certain things that I would explain. Escape. What do we like to call like an escape hatch or like a protective.
Okay.
There are ways completely legal by trust law that we can do. But essentially, one way to protect assets from Medicaid is to have transferred them into a very specific kind of Medicaid irrevocable trust.
Interesting.
And the idea is sort of, I'm giving up control over this, and after a period of 5 years, by law, Medicaid, you can't count it as an asset of mine. Okay?
Okay. So you have a home.
Right.
And is that something that you would put into a irrevocable trust?
Absolutely. And it's, this is an amazing tool. It has to make sense for you because it's something that once you put it in, right, it can't come out. It can change forms inside the trust. So with the house as an example, if I have a house and I transfer it into an irrevocable Medicaid trust, and then at some point I decide I want to downsize and buy a condo.
Okay.
The trust can sell my home, buy me a condo, but the trick is that whatever excess, let's say there's $50,000 of excess proceeds because I've downsized,
Sure.
that money stays protected, so that's the good news. The bad news is I can't pull that money out and go to Hawaii. I mean, that money stays in the trust,
Right.
and it stays protected.
If you're putting your initial home in the trust, that's what you're hoping anyways,
Right.
is to protect that.
Exactly.
So no trips to Hawaii is probably
not with that.
understood.
Save some other assets, and that a good example of that is why we would say I would never recommend that you put all of your assets in an irrevocable trust,
Okay.
because again, you're my client. I appreciate that you want to be able to leave money to your children or your heirs, but I'm not going to bankrupt you in the process
Right.
either. I mean, you've worked very hard all your life. You want to have access to your money. You want to do the things you want to do, and if there's extra, or money that you feel like you may not need in your lifetime as a liquid asset, that's a perfect asset to sort of tuck away.
Okay.
So to get to the flip side of, if we're talking about the home, things that you do not want to do, in my opinion, and everyone obviously is going to have different opinions, there's something called a life estate, where you can deed a property to someone and retain a life estate. So if I deed my house to you, Jen, and I retain a life estate, you're basically the owner, but I retain the right to live there. If during my lifetime I want to sell it, we all have to sign. We all have to be in agreement.
Okay.
Another version of that is that I'm just going to deed my house to you outright. So
I do hear of that often.
Yeah. Well, so and so here's what could happen. I'm 70. I deed my house to my daughter Penelope, who by then is not one, but however old she's going to be, and then she gets into an accident and someone has a judgment against her. She gets a divorce. She has a creditor from any number of scenarios. The younger person out in the world is often the one with the higher risk of having a creditor. And so here I've deeded my property to her.
I see.
And it's now her property that can be attached by her creditors. And at the end of the day, I may be homeless, right?
Got it.
So I can't protect you with that. So again, there are certainly some circumstances where that might make sense. But in terms of just for the sole reason of asset protection to get something out of my name, I don't like to recommend that because it's just, I can't protect you.
This is just a wealth of information, and to know all of these different things that are important to happen. I think it's great for people to research things, but I would have to say that going to speak to a professional like yourself is really the best way to be able to understand all of these different things. And everybody's unique. We're all unique.
Absolutely.
We all have different needs, we all have different assets, we all have different things that are important to us. And you were really, that was excellent how you touched upon the fact that some folks want to use it all, leave this world and use it all.
Yeah.
And other
that's
people
good.
are
Yeah.
very focused
Yeah.
on making sure, sometimes at the detriment of taking good care of themselves, which we see in owning a home care company is, you know, people are very concerned. They want to make sure they're leaving something for their children, which is such a beautiful gift. But you also don't want to neglect yourself at the same time. So I think that, you know, learning this information and knowing all the different options that you have and knowing that to be proactive is the best plan and to speak to a professional about it. I mean, it was so unfortunate that that woman did not have the opportunity to make choices right away for her husband in the hospital, and she thought she was all set. So, I mean, what I take away from this is, you know, it's certainly not one size fits all.
No, absolutely not.
And you need to speak with somebody that you trust, somebody that is going to customize it to your life and what your needs and wants are. Because it certainly could be misinterpreted. You could be guided in a way that isn't the best fit. It isn't ultimately what you want. And then the other big takeaway is that some things can change and you roll with it as you go through life. So therefore, when you're 18, it's not a bad idea, not necessarily to have a will or to have those things, because you really don't have a whole lot to do with that.
If you're 18 and you just have a healthcare proxy, I would feel like I've done my my job in getting that message out there.
Well, this is great because we're talking to seniors in our community about what they can do, about what their children can do, about what their grandchildren can do. Because at every stage of life, it's important for us to have this.
Yeah.
So thank you, Angelique, for being our guest.
It's my
So
pleasure.
Angelique of Eliopolis and Eliopolis, right here in Chelmsford, that can serve all of your needs in that way. And I know I felt incredibly lucky and blessed to feel like I have things in order as best as I could with Angelique there.
It's my
So
pleasure.
thank you, Angelique.
Thank you so much.